What is up, guys? We are back on the Crew 2 today for my top 4 touring bikes here on the game. It's kind of insane because I really do feel like the motorcycles are kind of distant on the Crew 2, mainly because they're probably going to be in the exact same class as the other cars, so most players are probably not going to pick these bikes over the cars in the events. I do want to know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you guys think the motorcycles should be in their own category? I really do feel like that might actually make them a lot more fun to use, but nonetheless though guys, I do have 4 of these bikes I do want to go over that I would say are my favorite. I'm also going to be doing a separate video on my top overall bike in 2023 because I really do think that's going to change from being the Panigale R here, but nonetheless guys, starting off here with my 4th pick is actually going to be interesting. Before I never actually ran this bike at all, but it's going to be the BMW S1000RR. I really do like running this bike now after running in that one summit where we had to do one of the new USST races. I did find this thing to actually be pretty dang good, which I did find this to be pretty interesting due to the fact that I really haven't used the S1000R that much in the past though. Funnily enough guys, this was actually one of my favorite bikes to use on the Crew 1. I used the S1000RR on so many of those faction races back in the day. My goodness, those used to be so much fun to make money and stuff, but after running this bike now on the Crew 2, I can definitely see why it's going to be pretty decent. I really do feel like it's going to be a pretty great competitor in the touring car category, even though this bike is going to have some flaws and or some of the other touring bikes as well. For one guys is going to be the top speed, so the top speed on the S1000RR is only going to be around 235 miles per hour, which at first you're probably not going to really worry all that much about, but here's the issue with this though. If you were doing some of the bigger events against the cars, you are going to be the slowest vehicle in there every single time. Considering every car does well over 250 at least 95% of the time though, you are always going to be a bit slower on the bikes, which I do find this kind of odd though, mainly because the bikes are always going to be at a disadvantage, which is basically going to make a lot of players not actually pick the bikes if they had to use them in the summits and or if they wanted to. I feel like if you did have a choice going against like a car, you're most likely going to pick a car over a motorcycle only because of that. And in some areas you can also most likely go around the corners a bit faster as well. The S1000RR to me definitely feels a lot better than something like the Ninja H2 and or the Ducati Panigale as well, because I was running that bike so much in the past. After jumping on the S1000RR, I was like, you know what? This bike is going to be much better than this one, and it's also better than the H2. Don't get me wrong guys, the H2 is honestly insane on here as well, but the biggest issue with that bike is by far going to be its weight. It really does feel like you're racing around that corner on a refrigerator. Who actually knew Kenmore's going to be such an upgraded motorcycle on a racetrack, but nonetheless guys, the S1000RR definitely feels pretty dang nimble. I really was not expecting this bike to be as good as it was in that summit. I'm honestly really glad to see other vehicles being used. Now, this is definitely going to be kind of unfortunate because of that lower top speed. I do want to know what you guys think about that. Do you think the bike should be a bit faster? I really do think they actually should be for that matter, but overall the BMW is still going to be one of my favorite bikes, especially over some of the others. And now moving over to my third option is going to be the KTM 1190 RC8. This bike to me guys feels kind of similar to the BMW S1000RR, and I think that's going to be a good thing because the bike has a nice mix of stability and or handling, and it really does actually feel pretty dang fun to race around as well. I also really do think the RC8 is a pretty awesome looking bike. I'm sure a lot of players might be slightly mixed on that big tail on the end of it like sticking out, but then again probably having a plate on the back of this might make this thing look slightly better. I actually had a neighbor that had one of these bikes back in the day as well. My goodness, that thing sounded insane for that matter, but similar to the BMW though guys, the top speed of the RC8 is going to be around 235 miles per hour, which is definitely going to be odd considering every bike is actually going to be capped now. What I find kind of insane about this is due to the fact that a lot of the cars actually can go past their speed just a little bit. For example, if the car's top speed is let's say 250 miles per hour, In some areas, you can probably push that car to like 252 to like 254. With the motorcycles, on the other hand, guys, at least with the KTM and or the BMW so far, is the fact that they do not go past 235. If you actually manage to hit 236, you're most likely going down a hill. I really did notice they actually cap these bikes at a pretty low top speed. I really do find this to be a slight issue, but one thing with the KTM though is racing this thing around a track though I had such a good time. This thing really does handle nicely. It also feels pretty nimble. It's almost going to feel insanely balanced, similar to the BMW S1000RR. I would actually say this is probably one of the biggest reasons why I like the KTM as much as the BMW, and or actually putting these bikes in my top 4 pick, for example. I really do think a lot of players would actually enjoy running the KTM and or like the BMW, even though the overall top speed on these bikes is probably going to be a bit of a turnoff. I really do feel like they're going to be insanely fun on racetracks though, and I will have to try out the KTM in summits to really see how it does compare to the cars. Overall guys, if you are looking for a pretty balanced bike, I would definitely recommend the RC8. And then moving over to my second pick is going to be the YZR-M1. I've actually been noticing this bike popping up in summits and or leaderboards insanely often. I really do feel like this is probably going to be one of the best overall balanced bikes in the class though. Is it going to be like the best touring bike? Most likely not, but it's also going to be pretty dang good. I really do feel like a lot of players have been using this thing pretty often. And of course guys, similar to the KTM and or the BMW, the top speed on the YZR is going to be around 235 miles per hour. I know that's kind of shocking. Not really, but the top speed of these bikes are definitely going to be a different conversation. But overall though, the YZ here is going to be a pretty awesome and or balanced motorcycle. This thing is definitely going to be insanely fun racing around a track though, because not only does it feel insanely balanced when tilting it back and forth, it's also going to have some nice acceleration. Plus I really do love the sound of these MotoGP bikes as well. They honestly sound incredible, and the overall engineering going behind these is still insane to me, but the Yamaha YZR is most likely not going to be new to many players though, because I have been noticing a lot more people actually running this bike, and I would say that's going to be for good reasoning guys, because even on a track, I cannot believe how easy this thing is to corner at higher speeds, and you can also find yourself flying out of the corners at higher speeds as well. Of course, if you guys are doing the regular events, watching out for the AI is always going to be a bit of a challenge on these motorcycles, but besides that though guys, if you do want to race these in summits, I would definitely say the M1 here is going to be a great option. Of course though, if it is going to be a no restriction, you once again have to go against the cars though, and depending on what track and or event it's going to be, you're definitely going to be at a disadvantage because of that top speed. I really would love to see these bikes in their own category because the M1 is so much fun to use, and I feel like being able to go against other bikes specifically would probably make this a lot more fun. But overall guys, the Yamaha is still going to remain one of my favorites, and with the YZR being as good as it is, I don't see this changing for an insanely long time. And now moving over to number 1 here guys is going to be the Suzuki GSX-RR. Now one thing I do want to mention though is I'm not saying this is going to be like the number 1 bike out of all 4. It's more of like my top pick out of all of these for one big reason, and that is going to come down to the agility of this bike is honestly insane. So similar to the other bikes guys, the top speed once again is not going to be very shocking. 235 miles per hour on the Suzuki here, but one thing I also have to admit is my goodness, these MotoGP bikes are honestly beautiful. I could not imagine riding one of these in real life, but overall guys, the Suzuki is going to have a big positive to it, even over the YZR, and that's going to come down to the agility and or handling this bike has. I feel like this thing is going to feel insanely flickable in basically every single area. This bike does feel insanely agile compared to something like the YZR, and if you were to race the Suzuki against like the H2, my goodness, they're probably going to feel like completely different bikes. I feel like if you actually jumped on the H2 and went around the track once, and then jumped on the Suzuki here, I feel like you're going to notice a difference immediately. Like honestly guys, it's kind of insane how good this bike feels around corners. I even noticed if you were to like mess up when approaching a turn, you can actually fix it pretty easily with this bike with how easy it does turn as well. I really do feel like that's going to be a big positive for many players, and that would probably steer a lot of people toward this bike over like the YZR and or over like the H2 for example as well. Now one thing I do have to admit though is I would say the agility of this bike is definitely going to be a positive. For some players though, I feel like it's going to feel kind of twitchy, which I did notice this a bit when racing it as well. If you guys are looking for the perfect balance for a MotoGP style bike, I would actually prefer the YZR over the Suzuki for the overall balancing feel, but my goodness, the agility of this bike is definitely going to be pretty insane. If I was to pick like one bike doing a summit event, I would probably pick the YZR for some of them, and then for some of the USST races, I would probably pick the Suzuki. I do want to know your thoughts in the comments below. Which touring bike is going to be your favorite and why? And I really do think a lot of players really want to see these bikes in their own category. Who knows, guys? Maybe we're going to see these bikes in their own class in Motorfest, but that's obviously going to be too early to tell. But again, guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And here are my updated pro settings on all four of these motorcycles.